We're joined by Hayden Delaney, a Senior Associate in the Intellectual Property and Technology team at HopgoodGanim. Hayden, thank you for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
Now, Hayden, a web startup in the US has just been forced to pay $800,000 to US federal regulators for breaching privacy laws when it improperly collected the personal information of children. Are privacy breaches a developing trend?
Yeah, I think that's right, Kate. Just to set the scene, the social networking site we were talking about was a site called Path. Now, Path, a little bit last year, got itself in a bit of hot water when a computer-savvy person noticed that the application for Path on his iPhone was actually uploading his address book data without his consent. So that's what really put Path in the path of the regulator, so to speak. And in terms of what it did for the industry, I think it was a bit of a wake-up call for social networking startups in particular. A lot of them were just taking the attitude that a person's address book on their iPhone was just a way to enhance functionality, and maybe there was a little bit of truth there, but it certainly was a wake-up call, I think. And at a more broader level, I think the trend you talk about is indicative perhaps of a few current technologies that have been around for a while, just increasing their hold, and a few emerging technologies coming about as well too, which are really forcing the law to adapt, forcing the law to come to terms with the situation that we have right now. Some of those technologies, obviously things like social networking are a good example of that. Other things like location-based marketing, where you target marketing at an individual based on their current location, other things like the cloud. But all of these things are really a subset of what the industry calls big data. And in essence, big data is a way in which companies are seeing value in the sheer masses of information we generate on a daily basis, and are seeing that they can commercially exploit this. And the law obviously has to come to grips with the fact that obviously companies want to commercially exploit our data, but where you draw the line is the question.
Or just in terms of the law coming to grips with what you were talking about, the Privacy or New Privacy Amendment Act is commencing in Australia in March. Do you think the stakes are going to be higher for businesses to get it right when it comes to compliance with their privacy obligations?
Look, I think the stakes are most definitely higher. When we think back to the last time we saw real privacy reform, it was back when the Privacy Act first came into play back in the late 80s, and today we're in a completely different environment to the late 80s. Social networking didn't exist at all in the late 80s. Certainly our reliance on digital technology wasn't there either. So the law needs to adapt, which Australia is trying to do right now via the new Privacy Act that's just come into operation. Where I think privacy law fell down in the past in particular was in the area of the penalties that were payable. They were, to be honest, completely woeful. The incentive for organisations to treat privacy with the seriousness it deserves just weren't there. And under the new law, the ante's really been upped. We're seeing fines potentially of $220,000 for individuals and up to $1.1 million for corporations. So we're seeing that privacy law is starting to really get some teeth on it. And I suppose for lawyers in particular, it'll be interesting to see how it affects other areas. So, for example, corporate transactions and due diligence activities. I think lawyers are going to have to start considering privacy law as part of that in order to properly determine what liability an organisation might have, what skeletons it might have in its closet, because we're going to start reaching that materiality threshold for a lot of these transactions that simply wouldn't have been there with the previous privacy laws.
And just finally, what do you see as the key compliance concerns for businesses over the coming months?
Yeah, look, I think the new laws are going to affect different industries in different ways. An area that was always tightly regulated is credit licensees, and that's only increasing under the new laws. At a more general level, organisations that engage in direct marketing, they're going to have to be really careful to make sure they're not contravening the new provisions which govern direct marketing in the new privacy law. And I don't really know any organisation that doesn't engage in some form of direct marketing, law firms in particular. And again, it's going to be interesting to see how the law deals with some of these emerging technologies like location-based marketing, to see whether it is appropriate and whether it's stifling those technologies or whether it's regulating them in an appropriate manner. That's the question. In terms of other issues that will need to be considered, cloud computing contracts are going to need to be reviewed because the cross-border disclosure rules under the new laws are significantly strengthened compared to what we saw in the previous Privacy Act. And in terms of ways in which organisations can comply with the laws, a bit of a compliance strategy, what I'd be suggesting is that organisations do a bit of a stock take of all the data they have sitting in their organisation, get a grapple on what they have, what they do with it, who they disclose it to, and by undergoing that exercise they'll be able to see what they need to do in order to properly comply with the new privacy laws. And just taking the lawyer hat off for a second, the other thing that organisations really need to be thinking about is whether the time is right now to invest in proper data security infrastructure to ensure that they have some technical measures to make sure that privacy breaches don't occur as well. So perhaps things like encryption where it's appropriate should be considered.
Well, lots of things for businesses to consider there. Hayden, thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
Thanks a lot for having me, Kate.